My name is Sarah Shaughnessy, and I'm a faculty engagement librarian at the University of Alberta. And I'll be facilitating the session today. Before we begin, I just want to mention that I'm in Edmonton. And this is traditionally Treaty 6 territory, a gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. So please put where you're from in the chat if you feel like it, because I know we have people from all over today. So this week, these lunch hour sessions are inaugural open pedagogy talks that are co-hosted by the University of Alberta, University of Calgary, and Thompson Rivers University. So I am very happy to welcome you here today to this session and for taking the time out of your busy days to come learn a bit about some of these really interesting open education projects. So we've got 1 hour together. We're going to have 3 separate presentations with about 10 to 15 minutes of presenting, and then a bit of a 5-minute kind of question period. So please feel free to ask your questions. If we've got a bit of time at the end and a new question appears to you, we'll ask it then. So without further ado, we'll start with our first session. Jacqueline Linden, professor from the School of Business at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, and Kayla Arthur, who is a student there. So welcome both of you.
Welcome everyone. Last fall, when the decision was made to shift to an OER, I decided to be fully transparent with my class. And in doing so, my goal was to encourage active feedback and engagement, knowing this could be transformational going forward. None of us wanted this to be a one-shot deal. So when the chance to present surfaced that we're here today, I asked the class to join in. I asked, who's in? Kayla Arthur, who is with me today, jumped up and said, I am. So we're really thrilled to be sharing these objectives with you. I also want to acknowledge a colleague of mine, Blake Kanewisher, who helped create this learning adventure way back at the beginning, and who's been a stalwart supporter ever since. So what's an adventure? Well, words matter, everyone, as you know. And the notion of starting an adventure made all this seem a lot more fun and exciting, rather than just a lot of work. There are three key components that make up an adventure. And implementing an OER made all of these requirements. So we're never quite certain how it's going to turn out. And of course, we can only mitigate risk, everyone. We can't absolutely get rid of it, right? But most importantly, I think, was the newness of doing something. We learn when we do things we've never done before. So we've learned a lot through this experience, both from a teaching and learning perspective. And as we share with you our lessons, I encourage you all to seek adventures in all the work that we do.
As a student, being told we were going to be using OER for the course, my very first thought jumped straight to the most obvious quantitative value to a student: cost. Last year, as a full-time student at SAIT, I spent $1,100 on textbooks alone. Using OERs for just one class during one semester was the equivalent of 13% of that cost, which has a huge impact. With tuition rising across the province, that alone was a very enticing figure. To instructors, the cost savings is translated into ongoing maintenance costs for the course. After this initial thought, my mind turned to thinking about possibilities. Using an OER would almost guarantee that the lessons we would be learning were current and relevant, a very important aspect to any business education, but especially in the rapidly changing environment we've been facing over the last few years. The material was flexible in that Jackie was able to fill in any gaps in the main material with additional resources. But the lasting impression that I was left with was, wow, here's an instructor who really cares about her students. She wants to try something different to give us what she feels is the best quality education at an affordable, accessible cost. This ended up giving me increased confidence in her as an instructor, as well as just in SAIT as an institution for my school. This level of confidence is incredibly important to students. These qualitative aspects I found really complemented the financial side as well, giving a true enhanced value proposition for OERs.
When I was looking for another course, I stumbled across the OER for the management class. I was actually out seeking a new leadership textbook because we had already started to move away from traditional textbooks. I literally stumbled across the principles of management. So how did this happen? Well, I found out that there were a number of current repositories out there. So with the support of Jessica Norman at our institution at SAIT, she's our subject matter expert, she directed me to a whole new world that I didn't know existed. Again, I want to share with you that I was actually on another adventure for my leadership course when I came across this resource. So one of the things I discovered in this was to keep our open minds, just keep open to the possibilities, Kayla's favorite word, around what is possible to enhance our classes. There are textbooks, but there's also curated resources. If I had shut my mind and only stayed focused on the leadership course, I would have missed this entirely. What I discovered in choosing this open educational resource, that I found a book that met 84% match of the outcomes of our Intro to Management course. So with that 16% gap, I had to supplement it with my own work experience, previous resources, and open accessible resources, another concept that Jessica supported me in developing an eye for. I came across this textbook because OpenStax or the OpenBC had a program where you can actually review a material. So I went in to understand what an OER was in a full textbook, simply chose principles of management. And that's how I discovered this match. I compared it to my outcomes. Again, completely unintended. There was a lot of US content. The open educational resources that I discovered were created from all over the world. However, I didn't see this as a stumbling block. In discussing it with my colleagues, we found that we used Canadian examples in all of our assignments. I bring in lots of other resources, and I simply removed the irrelevant stats and human rights legislation or human resource legislation that wasn't applicable to our subject. This was very easy to close. So with a little bit of work and not much more than what I would have prepped normally, transitioning to this OER became a really sort of small mountain to climb in that sense. It wasn't without its challenges.
Yeah. And of those challenges that myself and my peers faced when using OER, I found the prevailing issue to be surrounding the digital literacy of the student. Using a resource that may not be laid out in the same manner of many of our existing textbooks can take some getting used to, and many students are just not comfortable asking for help with those educational resources from their instructors. This does force students, however, to learn how to ask for help and to be accountable for their own education, and that is certainly never a bad thing.
From the faculty side, well, similar challenges. Digital literacy. I was I'm well accountable, very fluent in D2L. I was able to reorganize the open educational resource to fit within our course structure and within our LMS. So for example, the textbook was a different layout. The open educational resource textbook was a different layout than our course, but I was able to, with inside D2L, make that work. It also created the flexibility of my teaching methods, which again, some instructors like to have things very well laid out. They like sort of a course that's wrapped around a textbook. But because of that 16% gap or trying to better utilize the LMS, I had to actually increase my digital literacy a little bit more to be able to support all of that work. The timing, I also found as an instructor, I had to be ahead of the students more than just 24 hours. I wanted to double check everything and make sure it was accessible, recognizing some of the digital challenges that our learners may have. But in doing this, everyone, I expanded my own practice. And again, this has to be our own self-direction on how we want our teaching to go. I found myself getting a lot better at curating resources to fill those gaps. I go into my network and utilize just my colleagues within my networks to come in as guests. What was really interesting last fall, everyone, is we went through 2 different elections in our country and locally. The current headlines and current business things that are happening in the world, current events, become fodder to bring this OER to life. And so I also encourage my management leadership classes to stay abreast of everything happening in the world around us. It really helped to make that solidify and apply the concepts that we were seeing in the open educational resource. Again, I almost felt I had too many resources to close that 16% and found myself in every class I was teaching, bringing in discussions of what was in the headlines of our local and national newspapers, particularly today with what's going on.
In conclusion, it's clear to us that the benefits outweigh the challenges in OER's disruption of the traditional use of textbooks in the present-day educational system. Most students and faculty benefit immensely from such a learning adventure in this information-rich world. As Jacob Bernowski mentions in The Ascent of Man, human knowledge is personal and responsible, an unending adventure at the edge of uncertainty. To take one's education, their search for knowledge into one's own hands, is certainly an incredibly personal journey. OERs make a difference to both students and faculty along this path. This is a valuable and worthwhile adventure to undertake.
Thank you, everyone, for joining both Kayla and I as we share with you our experience with our implementing our class.
Thank you both. That was wonderful. Yeah, that sounds fabulous. And I'm so glad you came and shared it with us today. So we're going to move to the next presentation because it's that time. If you do have more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I think we still have a bit of time before the end of the session. So our next presentation is creating a computational science platform at the University of Eswatini. And we have Peter Berg, a professor of mathematics and physics at the University of Alberta, and 2 University of Alberta students, Harshal Vyas and Joseph Menezes.
Welcome, everyone. What you will notice in this talk, it ties in very nicely with the presentation by the colleagues from Brock, which I'm really excited about. Some of the jargon will make a little bit more sense to you, maybe, they're going to have in our talk. So I'm Peter Berg. Harshal and Joseph, you're going to meet in a minute when they talk about their part of the talk. And Philip Naden is a former student who is helping us along a little bit in this. So what are we doing? So what we're doing is the following. So we entered through Academics Without Borders. You may know this organization, a Canadian non-for-profit organization that's connecting academics in particular in North America with countries that still have some ways to go in terms of developing, in particular, their pedagogy and their teaching and so forth, and their capacity in the university sector. So in my case, I had an international PhD student at Simon Fraser University, actually, and he returned to the University of Eswatini. Eswatini, in case you don't quite know, I don't hold it against you, used to be called Swaziland until the king 2 years ago decided overnight it's going to be called Swaziland from now, Eswatini from now on. And they have 3 universities basically, and the University of Eswatini is the main university. So as my student returned and took up a position there, I saw this call with Academics Without Borders, and now we have this project. So that's how it came about. So basically what I want to tell you all is that work well with your international students as they return, maybe some of them to the places where they came from. They might be a fantastic resource to start such projects. That's my message here. It's a 2-year project. Academics Without Borders basically just supports it through travel grants for us to visit Eswatini, hopefully at some point soon. And it includes at our end at the University of Alberta, it includes another professor. It's 5 of us at the University of Alberta. You saw the 4 names on the first page. And there's at this point 7 colleagues. That means professors, a dean, and students at the University of Eswatini. So year 1, well, we were already supposed to go there, but because of COVID, we couldn't. So we're developing this project together with the colleagues in Eswatini, mostly, of course, through Zoom. We're using Slack as a platform, right, for project management purposes. And we're at the University of Alberta, our job is to basically build the platform and the tools, and then the idea is in year 2 to hand this over to the University of Eswatini. We're supposed to go there, visit, hold a workshop, etc. So what is this platform about? So I tell you a little bit about the needs they have, and they're a bit unique, actually, something we don't often think about in Canada, I would say. So the idea is to build a simple, reliable website for the hosting of free course content, or course material, and particularly for their Faculty of Science and Engineering. And so the dean is on board. He's actually involved in the meetings and so on. He's very hands-on. It's great. And it's supposed to be a simple website. Site simple means simple to be used by the creators of course content, by the administrators of the website, and easy use by the learners, the students. And here's what is different, perhaps. So it was made very clear to us by the colleagues at Eswatini that one of their big challenges is bandwidth. So their electricity grid is not so reliable as ours. So they have fairly often blackouts, but also it's very costly for students in particular to have monthly data plans, right? So their home internet or for their cell phones, it's really costly for them to have those data plans, especially in relation to their purchasing power, something that I had to really learn. So what they like to see, instead of a cloud-based solution like that was presented by our Brock colleagues this morning, we're going to go a slightly different way. So we want to feature interactive e-textbooks, and it's going to be Jupyter Books, very similar to what you saw this morning. And they're supposed to then, well, we have complete lecture materials basically presented in those, and it includes executable code, videos, graphics, hyperlinks, and so on. And we wanted to start with computational physics, applied math, that's going to be the focus. And then we want to branch into the other areas of that faculty, so biology and chemistry. And yes, as I already mentioned, the solution then would be for us to use also Jupyter Books. And Harshal and Joseph will now talk a little bit in more detail about this from a technical side. Hosted on GitHub and broadcast, we're actually going to use a professional web hosting service because it has become very affordable. So hopefully I gave you some context and what the constraints are, and I want to draw your attention to the low bandwidth requirements, because many communities, even in Canada, right, rural communities have similar challenges, as you know. And this is something we keep in mind. And so with that, I hand over to Joseph next.
So with the website, we wanted something that was easy to use, basically very simple. What you click is what you get. And with the low bandwidth, we wanted to make everything strictly front end, well, reduce as much back end as possible, as acceptable. And we also wanted the website to just be a platform for user interface, so that instead of going through the technical background that you'd need in order to download the book or even build a book, you could just come on the website, click the subject that you wanted, and you would get the book that you needed. So the website that's shown on the slides allows you to do that. So we have this picture that shows you what it looks like on a normal desktop, and there are some more photos as well that show what it looks like on a mobile. And it's it's a little bit different, but it also allows you to explore explore the website and its contents on a much deeper scale. There is some background behind the website. What we are using, which is really good compared to in comparison to what we've learned today in the morning from Brock U with the workshop, is that we're using GitHub. Now, GitHub's really good because it's free to use, and it also allows for collaborative work. So it's not only that we're doing work, but the University of Eswatini is doing work, and far beyond us. And after we've graduated, left, and we probably wouldn't see us anymore, there are people who can still continue working on this project after us. And GitHub allows us to do that. In short form, GitHub is basically a huge storage space for files. If you've used Google Drive before, GitHub works the same way, but it allows you to run code. It allows you to do a lot more things in terms of from a computational background. And another resource that we also use is DigitalOcean. So DigitalOcean is automizes our website based on what we put onto GitHub. So as frequently as we update our GitHub, our website will be updated, which is really good because it requires less work for everyone. It's easy to use. And the most important thing is that it's cheap and affordable. Like looking at prices and what this website requires, you're paying around $5 a month. And in a grand scheme of things over a year, that's $60. And it obviously fluctuates based on use cases. But with the use of the website, it would not be too expensive where it would break your bank account. And that was the whole aim of this website: make it cheap, make it affordable, make it easy to use, and basically make it so that after it's all completed, after this platform is created, that there's no need to go back to it. Really, it's just to upload books and to download books as well. So I'll pass it over to Harshal to explain how these books are created.
Thank you. So as Peter mentioned and Joseph mentioned, our solution for making this idea come alive is the use of Jupyter Books. A lot of people do confuse what Jupyter Books are because there's another thing that's called Jupyter Notebooks. But what it is Jupyter Books is an open source platform or an open source application that's allowing us to build like e-publications of textbooks, documents, all these things. And the good thing about having open source applications is that because they have a massive community and resource, so there's a lot of things that it's always being updated on a daily basis. It's not like our computers where you have like Windows or things and you have to wait for patches to come. As people find issues, they'll fix it and you'll get an update quick enough. So it's everyday updates, sometimes within days, 2 days. So keeping sure that this is at its highest and most reliable situation is important, especially when we're trying to make sure the stuff is lasting longer. So it's not like, oh, we're building something now and it's not going to last longer than a year or 2 years. So that was one thing that helps in this matter. The other thing is that Jupyter Books allow us to have executable code inside. So we wanted, right now our focus was computational math, computational physics, those departments to begin with. And as a learning tool, sometimes practice is very important. So Jupyter Books allows us to run these types of languages such as Python, Julia, R, and they can either allow students to test these things on their own machine or online. So that's the other point I have, is that this is allowing us to both use it online. So if someone wanted to use it in a browser format and they were using internet here, so like for us in Canada, it's not a big issue. So we can just search this up on an online browser and use it and it works perfectly fine. But in our case, having low bandwidth, they can install something called a CLI, which is just allowing them to download it on their local machine and then just download these books individually. And they'd be able to see it the same way that they're supposed to be, make changes, test it out, and even play around with it. So if teachers build a book and they downloaded the book and they wanted to add their own notes on top of it, they could, and that would be on their own computer and that they can keep. So that allows us that element of flexibility, and to make it easier for me and Joseph to make this thing come together, it allows us, once a book is done, we can convert it into a website format. So we have commands that do all these things. It converts the entire thing into a build format for us, and then we would post this on our website to be able to be, hey, here's a link to the site. You can have the source code, which is just meaning that you have all the details of how this application was built. You can download on your own computer. We can save it as a PDF also. So we have room for flexibility and adaptation around this idea. And it allows us to integrate more than one things. So you can have, I'll show you in the next upcoming slide after this point, of you can like have chapters, notes. If people want to write HTML, they can put in HTML. We use the Markdown as a base thing, which is very similar to how Word is done, just that there's a couple of things that you just add at the front of like hashtags and things to make things bold and things, but it's overly not complex. It's pretty simple and intuitive. So as we can see here, I can actually put this link in the chat for you guys if you guys would like to take a look. This link will give you, I'll take you to a Jupyter Books gallery site, and it just shows you the types of things that people have created and how it's being used. So the image below has a couple of things. On the left side, you can see there's sections of those tabs. So each of those things are just chapters that people have done and subsections in each. And when you go into each subsection, you have sections where you can have comments, things, and even executable code. So like if you wanted, they can type code in, run it, restart it, see, and play around with this. So right now here, there's a URL because they're doing it locally, but once you have it on your own computer, you can do the same thing and play around with and make any changes. And because GitHub is also open source in this, they work really well together. That's why at the top, there's icons to like connect it with GitHub. You can even have the downloads. You can want to download it as a PDF on your own computer. You have the option. So everything is very well suited and integrates well in the case that what we're trying to achieve with low bandwidth, easy accessibility, and the objective is still present there. So looking at all these factors, I think this was our best way to achieve the goal that we were trying to do for the University of Eswatini.
Yeah, that's great, Harshal. If I can just say a couple of things at the end. So I encourage you to look at the link that Harshal has put into the chat box. And the reason is because if you look around a little bit, some of the major institutions in North America have been adopting Jupyter Books. You'll be quite impressed, and it's growing fast. And the last thing I would say is when we say bandwidth constraints in Eswatini, so there are no bandwidth constraints on campus, right? So when students are on campus, they can download whatever they want, free of charge to the university. So that's not the issue. But then they can take this home, right? They can take these Jupyter Books home and work from home. Also, this comes in very handy during COVID or any future crisis. They were telling us, of course, any other health issue or any other crisis, and it's not a terribly stable country at the moment. There are many issues, and this makes the whole educational environment at the University of Eswatini basically more resilient. And with that, we'd like to thank you and can take questions now or at the end of this whole session.
It's a wonderful project. It's really, really interesting to me. And particularly the thoughtfulness you've put into the sustainability and the collaboration that you're doing with partners over there.
You just mentioned the resilience of the organization, Peter. I think that last word that just stood out to me, and with everything that's going on right now, obviously, have you already started to think about applications for just ensuring post-secondary education stays accessible to other people? And again, just going off the cuff with world events, what are some of those conversations that you've already had?
I have them currently with other professors in Canada who have a similar passion for this subject that I do. And I wasn't aware of the initiative at Brock University that we saw this morning. But I would say this, Jackie, okay, So with open educational resources, by definition, open should be free, right? And of course, and yet we're tying into some really major initiatives or even companies, right? We're using DigitalOcean, that's a private, that's a corporation, right? And so what I'm saying is open educational resources, there's a balance between keeping and maintaining your own local knowledge. That's important to say SAIT in your case, right? Versus off-the-shelf stuff that dominates the entire planet, right? One textbook for calculus, one textbook for 101 business, right? So we have to really think about carefully, where do we want to go? And resilience can be a mix of the two, right? But I think there's a huge opportunity, but I think we don't have to look beyond Canada necessarily, although I would encourage everyone to do that. I think within Canada, we have huge challenges in our rural communities, to be honest with you. And our platform, our idea is it can be adopted also in rural settings in Canada, as long as you have access to a library, right? The public library, even we can come in and download whatever you need and you can take off for another week, that sort of thing. Yes, I agree with you. And we see what's happening in one particular country right now. Their education sector is basically collapsing right now, right? So how could you, and if it wasn't this severe, mind you, it's an extremely severe event, but it was less severe, but still significant. Yes, I think we should really think about how to provide build resilience into post-secondary education around the world, actually. I think there's a lot of opportunity, some for profit, some non-for-profit.
And if I could just add on to what Peter was just saying, yesterday, during the same Open Education Symposium, there was an event that talked about the Zero Textbook Initiative that's being held by a lot of universities here in Alberta, and this kind of creates a head front towards those goals that we have in Alberta by starting it off in other countries, I guess. Making education accessible is really important, especially now with the amount of budget cuts that universities are going through. It's really important that that education is accessible to everyone, and that it's not made a privilege but a commodity, and made common for people to use. So that's one of the main reasons why this is such an important project.
Okay, so we're going to move to our last presentation for this lunch hour. We're going to hear from Laura Kultutsky, who's an associate librarian at University of Calgary, and Emily Buse, who's a student there. And they're going to be talking about the University of Calgary Digital Archives and Curriculum Project. So welcome.
My name is Laura Kultutsky. Like many of us, pandemic has sort of changed our lives for better or for worse. And when I came back from a research leave, I was given a new job of being a learning projects librarian, which was interesting, but not something I was entirely familiar with. So, so Emily and I were tagged together to work on this project. She was hired by the library, and we are currently working on this project, and we hope to sort of finish it up by the end of spring semester. But it is a fascinating project, and I've really appreciated working with a student like Emily, and I'll let her introduce herself and give you a bit of information about her background.
Hi, so my name is Emily Buse. I'm currently in my final year at U Calgary during my undergrad in English, focusing on Indigenous literature. And I was hired on by the University of Calgary Library, as Laura mentioned. And I was kind of approached with the idea of getting to work on something I was passionate, and I do want to pursue a career in curriculum design and development, kind of advocating for Indigenous students and Indigenous communities, and thus this project was born. And I've been very lucky to work with Laura and I guess get to where we are today.
So the origins of the project, as I said, I came back from a research leave and was asked to sort of work on developing curriculum materials that would also incorporate U of C holdings, which was something I'd never done before. So this whole thing has been quite a learning process. In 2019, for those of you who are unaware, the holdings of the Glenbow Museum were shifted to the University of Calgary as part of an agreement. And in 2019, later that year, they opened the Glenbow Western Research Center. And that is open to U of C researchers and also to the public. In 2020, I was asked to create an OER that would focus on promoting the digital collections within collections like the Glenbow that could be linked to the K-12 curriculum. And we have many collections, and the whole premise is that we can create awareness of sort of history of both Alberta and Canada and wider. So eventually I'll be going through a lot of these collections and seeing if we can pull out things to connect back to both this project, but also possibly new projects that will also tie back into the K-12 curriculum. So it's been exciting, but it's also been a little bit intimidating. I'm not involved with the digital humanities, so this was all brand new to me. So what we've been trying to do is expand awareness of the digital collections, and we've also at the University of Calgary committed ourselves to an Indigenous strategy, and we are focused primarily within the digital collections on focusing on Indigenous materials that represent our Indigenous people, but also sort of their representations. So, and we are also opening this up so that anyone can see this collection, the K-12 curriculum collection, and teachers in Alberta will connect it back to our curriculum here, but it could be used elsewhere as well. So, and basically we've really achieved a multiple goals by doing this project, and I'm looking forward to seeing it finally in its final form. So what we've done is we've gone through the collections and we have found Indigenous images and also documents such as treaties, images of treaties that were signed. And we've linked those with the K-12 curriculum. The Glenbow collection, because it's focused on local and Western Canadian history, was really sort of an obvious choice for us as a pilot. And the Glenbow Museum, when I was growing up, was heavily used by teachers. We often would go there on field trips and explore our history as it was represented within Glenbow. So what we're hoping to do is have the ability to let educators sort of see what was in the Glenbow, that had all of the things that have been digitized from there, and let their students see sort of history and bring history to life for the students. So, and as I said, this wide range of collections that have been digitized. And I think obviously digital collections have fit well within the last couple of years, considering a lot of universities and colleges have been working online. But I think we really are hoping that it actually will draw people to the collections and raise awareness of what's within them into a wider environment. So, and I will, Emily, talk about her process and how she went about sort of developing the collections and collecting them into a structure.
Thank you. So as Laura mentioned, it was a bit of a daunting task to comb through the curriculum and kind of create this project. So I first started with curriculum mapping, noting the different Indigenous topics and themes throughout, as well as areas where Indigenous knowledges could complement student learning. I took keywords and concepts to search for relevant images and materials within the digital collection, like Blackfoot or Cree, to get nation-specific materials, or even beating together more on traditional art forms. With so much overlap, I began with larger light boxes, which contained about hundreds of images from those preliminary subject searches, before grouping materials grade by grade. What fits where was determined by the learning outcomes identified within the curriculum. And the light box shown on the screen is actually for 10th grade social studies, related to one of 4 guiding questions. Section 10.1 of the curriculum asks, to what extent should globalization shape identity? Examining the ways in which individuals and collective communities express identities. So to convey this, we've included images that demonstrate aspects of ceremony among Indigenous communities like traditional foods, attire, art, languages, and storytelling, all of which contribute to building that sense of community. By thinking about these learning outcomes a little more broadly, we were able to offer several resources which respectfully connect classrooms to Indigenous perspectives as needed by educators and their students.
Emily did a lot of work developing these light boxes, which was a structure that had already been in place before we started the project. But there's such a depth of collections. A lot of the images you see are not necessarily just individual images. There are multiple images collected within some of these images themselves. So there's so much depth that we're looking forward to exploring that and pulling things out and tying that back to the curriculum and making connections for instructors, students, and educators. So this did not happen just with Emily and I. That would have been crazy, to be honest. We had many collaborators within libraries and cultural resources at the University of Calgary. The initial people we contacted were the Special Collections and Archives staff. They were so helpful and really wanted to see those collections thrive and be seen elsewhere. So they provided us with guidance and suggestions as to which collections should be appropriate, or maybe just pointed us towards certain aspects, and also search terms, that type of thing. So we did use the light boxes, which already existed within the digital collections. And those were really helpful, not only just to understand for ourselves how we wanted to collect things, but it gave a structure to the project and what we were doing. So, and created sort of meaningful groupings of materials. The digitization staff provided us with a lot of instruction and access to tools like Cortex. We obviously did not know how to use any of these things when we started. So it's been a learning process for us as well. And we have to thank them for their extreme patience in explaining how these tools function in non-technical language, and also providing us with the ability to modify them. So we can add to this project, we can change focus, we can move images around, we can do a lot of these things ourselves. So that's very helpful. We've also been working with Spatial and Numeric Data Services, and they are helping us to do things with mapping. We wanted to sort of create other representations of the information and organize it, again, restructuring it in slightly different ways for sort of a more visual presentation. Even though we're talking about images, the maps are kind of interesting in terms of how things get organized. So as I said, we're playing around with that, and we'll continue to play around with that. And Emily's going to go into a little bit more detail about her process again and talk a bit more about ThingLink, and we're using ArcGIS story maps for some of the project as well. So.
Awesome, thank you, Laura. So based on the process I discussed a little earlier, we developed digital light boxes to organize our information sets informed by the curriculum and expected learning outcomes. I began with social studies as it had the most direct connections to Indigenous topics, some grades a little more than others, as our light box sizes range from, I think, 8 to 184 items per grade. As mentioned earlier, each set of images is organized grade by grade, subject by subject, to best organize and accommodate user needs. Awesome, thank you. In 8th grade social studies, students examine historical worldviews from Japanese, European, and Spanish perspectives. So there was no direct link to the Indigenous peoples of Canada, nor is there any explicit mention of residential schools in the current curriculum. So I wanted to provide a resource that could potentially help bridge that gap and add another layer to the conversation on historical European worldviews and the impacts had on Indigenous people of Canada. So each point on the map shown on the screen represents one of 139 residential school locations credited to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. These school symbols represent the institutions with images from the Glenbow Library and Archives digital collection. So I think on our next, oh, that's okay. So on this slide, we have a little bit of an example here. So there is more information on the Morley Residential School found within our collection. So by clicking on the link within ArcGIS, users are redirected to the collection of images also shown on our slide in that Lightbox Cortex form. And then as the project developed further, we decided to house all of these elements on a ThingLink due to its accessibility within the educational community. We aim to create a resource, we aim to create an educational resource, that appeals to educators and students at all levels. So by selecting the appropriate grade level on the screen, users will find relevant materials for each core subject area alongside health and wellness and fine arts subjects. And the images we have here is an example of the 10th grade page, with each subject linking out to its respective image folder. Clicking on the social studies icon brings up a brief course description and a button to access this corresponding image folder, as do each other subject listed.
Emily and I have been working on this for 10 months, probably, anyway. So as I said, a lot of this was a learning process. So we do have further steps that we want to take. And one of the primary ones we want to do, as I said, by the end of the spring semester, which would be at May in Canada, is to get some feedback. So the feedback we're going to try and collect will be from K-12 teachers and sort of resource staff. One of the pieces I first started working on was medicinal plants. And one of the concerns I thought of fairly quickly was how much information is traditional knowledge and how much of that should be shared. So we'll be in touch with people who have an understanding of those things and can advise us as to that. And obviously student teachers who we really would like to use this resource to help incorporate the Indigenous materials within our digital collections into their practice. So we will be working to do that as well. And my future plans, once Emily graduates, is to also build some other connections between our physical collection. We have a curriculum library with K-12 kits and other resources, and this digital project. So say we have an image on the Stampede in Calgary and sort of the Indigenous involvement in that, then we can actually pull a kit if we have one on the Stampede and connect that to the digital project. So one of the things I also just wanted to mention briefly, I'm going to put up an acknowledgement slide for all the people who have helped us with this project. I wanted to name some specific people because we could not have done this project without them. But one of the things I would like to also talk about very briefly is the experiential learning program. The library, sometimes I don't know if it gets seen as someplace where students can come and do a project like this. I mean, this project closely aligned with Emily's interests. So the lovely thing is that everyone benefited from her involvement in this, but we would definitely love to see other students come and work with us in the library on projects like this, or if they have ideas what they might like to do, we're happy to work with them as well. So thank you very much for your time.
I'm so grateful for these presentations, and I love that they've kind of showed us a range of involvement in open educational resources, from creating and using them, implementing them in the class. So I think it's just been a very interesting assortment of presentations that's been really wonderful. So thank you to all the presenters.